A Place to Belong. By Melinda Curtis. Chapter 1. From the moment the auto repair shop door swung closed behind him, Axel Martinez knew he'd made a mistake coming back to Seaglass Bay Automotive. Not one to back down from the hard stuff, he planted his steel-toed work boots on the concrete floor of the closed shop and looked around. Standing toolboxes and electronic diagnostic equipment lined the side and back walls. An old Ford sedan occupied a far bay, hood up. Car lifts sat empty in two of the three other bays. To his right, a small waiting room and office had been made with plate glass running waist-high to the ceiling. Seaglass Bay Automotive was a mechanic's dream. Well cared for and large enough to make a good living. Axel wanted to buy it. He'd scheduled a meeting here with the owner, Dennis Hammond, and his real estate agent, Sam Bell. But he'd been stood up. Axel stuffed his hands in his grease-stained coverall pockets. I was supposed to meet Mr. Bell and Mr. Hammond? He hadn't meant that to come out as a question. There was no question about whether he had an appointment. The question was why hadn't the men honored it? Axel glanced toward the exits. First, the small door behind him and then the rear exit behind Penny Bell Carlson, his high school crush and Mr. Bell's daughter. Dad had something come up. He sent me instead. Penny's cheeks flamed red. If history was any indicator, her blush was deeper when she lied than when she was embarrassed, which meant history. Axel hated the past. He tried to find something positive here, in the present. All he found was Penny. She looked better than what he remembered from a decade ago. She still had her all-American, girl-next-door looks, blonde, blue-eyed, trim body, classy clothes. He hadn't taken in more than a glimpse of her in what seemed like forever. Penny stayed in her circle of friends and family in Seaglass Bay, and he stayed in his. Axel kept his oil-stained hands in his coverall pockets, glancing over his shoulder at the exit once more. Girls like Penny weren't supposed to give guys from the wrong side of the tracks a second look. Except she had. That one time. The fallout hadn't been pretty. Axel worked his jaw at the memory. Forget the past. A sound from the auto shop's office door drew Axel's attention. A little blond boy of about 3 pressed his body against the glass door, flattening his palms near his face, smushing his nose and open mouth against the glass in what seemed like a silent plea for help. A large blue sippy cup hung neglected from his hand, then dropped to roll around at his feet. "Oh, no," Penny said in a panicked voice. She ran between the service bays to the office, her black high heels tapping on the concrete with the same urgency Axel's blood was tapping at his temples. Trey woke up. "I'm coming, sweetie." Trey? Axel glanced around the shop, imprinting the image of the place he'd once worked into his memory, storing it along with the other things he'd been unable to have in his lifetime because of what his mother was, and the chip he'd carried on his shoulder as a result of it. What kind of name is Trey? We're judging names now? Penny opened the door for the boy and swung him into her arms. That's rich coming from you, Alexander. She smoothed the boy's haystack hair away from his face with all the love Axel had longed for as a child. His name is Brett John Carlson III. Trey. Named him after Brett, did you? Her ex-husband. Axel generally kept to himself, but even he'd heard about Penny's messy divorce brought upon by Brett's two-timing. Just the thought of the high school golden boy and bully gave rise to angry bitterness. Let's hope this little guy makes a better go of things than his father. Shut up, shut up, shut up, he thought. Penny frowned at him. Sorry. Axel removed his hands from his pockets, curled his fingers, crossed his arms, and tucked his fists into his armpits, trying to lock himself and his emotions up tight. Penny was the last person in the world he wanted to pick a fight with. She'd been nice to him in school, not that he'd always deserved it. And she'd been nice to him today by showing up and telling him in person that Seaglass Bay Automotive was out of his reach, like that Ferrari he dreamed of owning someday. She hadn't said as much, but Axel could read the writing on the wall. Penny was still frowning at him, Trey's head tucked under her chin. The toddler stared at Axel, too, but without the frown. Axel tried to charm the little guy with a smile, all without loosening the arms over his chest. I'm generally a background player, kid. I don't speak until I'm spoken to. That's new, Penny murmured. Axel supposed he was different than when they'd been in school. Back then, he'd popped off on the regular. Arms still tightly crossed, Axel bent at the knees to look Trey in his big blue eyes. Sometimes the pendulum swings, kiddo. Smart-mouthed teens can learn to think before getting into trouble. Smart-mouthed teens aren't always looking for trouble, but they always seem to find it. Penny's frown seemed to be giving way at the corners. I've stayed out of trouble since graduation. Alex straightened, giving the kid another smile. Hard lessons learned. I'm a good guy now. No trouble at all. He straightened, glanced around the shop, and sighed. Not that everyone seems to believe it. This has nothing to do with who you are, Axel, Penny said gently. But her cheeks were pinkening again. I won't kid myself. I'm not stupid. I know that. Penny's voice was still soft. She was being nice to him again. He had a weak spot for people who were nice to him. I just thought, Axel's arms loosened. His fists unfurled. His hands dropped to his sides. I thought that the past was in the past. I thought people had forgotten that I'm the son of the town drug addict. Or that I was the motorhead delinquent who liked taking fast cars for joy rides. He made a silent apology to Dennis Hammond and Sam Bell, both of whom had great taste in cars. No wonder they didn't want to take his interest in buying the place seriously. Penny's little boy stared at Axel with big, blue, puppy dog eyes. Axel, Penny's gaze softened to something resembling pity. Geez, oh Pete. I have to get out of here. But the lock was off his emotions, and they tumbled out, falling between them with a thud. I'm not the guy who lets anger run his mouth anymore. I'm not the guy who lets frustration guide his fists anymore. I'm not even the guy who kisses the first girl to be nice to him. But what Seaglass Bay sees, he sighed. What this town sees is apparently something different than who I am today. That's why you're here, isn't it? Hang on. Penny scoffed, cheeks a soft pink. I wasn't the first girl to be nice to you. Or the first girl you kissed, if memory serves. But you were the only one who meant something to me. Axel glanced at the exit once more. I didn't come here to skip down memory lane. I've been saving, and I was hoping, he shook his head. You want to start your own auto repair shop, she finished for him, closing the distance between them with slow steps, hips swaying because of those almost hypnotic heels. Those heels should be outlawed for use by single mothers. My own shop. Yes. Axel forced his gaze to the ceiling, hating that he felt vulnerable bearing his fragile dream to her. That's why I'm here, right? But if your dad and Dennis didn't show up, I don't know that any offer I make would be accepted anyway, Anne. Don't you dare talk down to yourself. His foster mother's voice rang between his ears as if Lita Hollister had hold of his shoulders and was trying to shake some sense into that thick head of his. She'd been dead and buried for 2 years and yet he could swear she was the angel who rode shotgun on his shoulder. Axel, Penny began in that gentle way of hers. If you were a serious player for this business, you'd have to qualify for $1 million loan. That's how much the property and business itself are listed for. Her gaze roamed Axel's face as if there was a riddle to be solved somewhere between his lips and his eyebrows. Did you get pre-qualified? Go to a bank? Axel gave a quick shake of his head. Have you ever bought real estate before? Axel shook his head again, focusing on the cute boy in Penny's arms so that she wouldn't see how unfit he was for this thing called adulting. I'm a newbie when it comes to things like bank loans. And relationships with girls from the right side of town. Never had one. I've paid for all my vehicles in cash. He tickled the little nugget's feet. Don't you think that's smart, buddy? Stricken by shyness, the little dude tucked his feet up, folded in on himself, and hit his face against Penny's chest.
Yeah,
I'm shy around strangers too, Axel admitted, simultaneously coming to terms with the fact that his dream would remain just that, a dream. It was time to go. He gave the shop one last, longing look, taking in Penny's shapely legs out of the corner of his eye because he was a man, after all, and she was his kind of woman. Which meant, like everything else, she was out of reach. Are you serious about this? Penny asked suddenly, so close now that if she turned her shoulder it would bump into his. I am, but guys like me. Guys like you should get pre-approved for financing, Penny said firmly. Her unwavering tone matched the determined look in her eye, although why she was determined was beyond Axel. I can refer you to Cindy at Bayside Mortgage Company. She doesn't intimidate first-time property buyers. He didn't admit he had no idea what a mortgage company was. Don't I need to talk to a bank? No. Cindy works with lots of different banks. She finds financing so you don't have to waste time sitting in a string of banks and filling out paperwork to apply for loans. Penny explained it all so simply and without talking down to him. That's helpful. Axel glanced around, hopes rising. So I might be able to buy this place after all? Own his own shop. Set his own rules. Be his own boss. No, Penny said gently. I say that not only because you'd need to put 20% of the purchase price down in cash. $200,000? Axel closed his fingers, crossed his arms, and tucked his fists into his armpits again. He'd saved a lot, just not enough apparently. But there's also the fact that you stole Dennis Hammond's Corvette back in the day. Despite balancing a rug rat on her hip and shouldering a tote that was big enough to hold a small television, Penny placed a hand on Axel's wrist and gently loosened his grip on himself. Dennis is old school. He's never going to sell his life's work to you. And if he did, he'd charge such a premium that it wouldn't make financial sense. Hey, I was in middle school when the incident in question happened. A hot wiring prodigy of his mother's car-thieving drug dealer. Technically I didn't steal his Corvette because I brought it back. In fact, that was where his foster father Clay Hollister, who'd been the town sheriff at the time, had caught him. It's called joyriding, which is a rite of passage. Innocent fun. And besides, Dennis doesn't hold a grudge. He hired me to work here after graduation. He knows what I'm capable of. Those last words felt negative. Don't you dare talk down to yourself, Alexander. I mean it. Axel lightly tickled Trey's ribs. The kid gave him a tentative smile. We both know Sheriff Hollister twisted Mr. Hammond's arm to hire you. Penny fiddled with Trey's hair again. Your parents are saints. Foster parents, Axel murmured. He didn't call Lita and Carl Hollister mom and dad. He'd never been given that right. And, yeah, Lita was a saint. His chest felt tight just thinking about her being gone. Hot on the heels of that feeling came the mixed emotions he had with Clay selling the house where he'd almost felt like part of the Hollister family. Axel rubbed at the sudden tightness in his chest. He was the only foster kid Clay and Lita hadn't adopted, and that still had the power to sting. Some dreams aren't meant to be. Just because this opportunity is out of reach, doesn't mean they all are. Penny looked equal parts sympathetic and optimistic. It was the optimistic part that Axel found hard to believe. I appreciate the offer, Penny, but it's obvious I'm never going to succeed here. And by here, he meant in Seaglass Bay. He mustered a smile for Trey. Nice meeting you, kid. He tickled the boy's foot lightly again. See you later. Bye, Trey said, as he squirmed and giggled. Be good. Then he continued to repeat, bye, as if he enjoyed hearing the sound of his own voice. Axel headed for the exit, striding out with his shoulders back and unapologetic steps that would have made Lita proud. Trey. Penny lifted the suddenly silent 3-year-old in front of her. Say that again, she commanded because her son had stopped talking the moment the door shut behind Axel. Bye, be good. Trey nestled his head beneath her chin, mute. Penny's heart scaled up her throat. Every child is different. How many times had Dr. Inman told her that? Not that Brett had listened once. He was more likely to say there was something wrong with Trey, words dripping with disappointment. Penny's jaw thrust out. Trey was 3. The average 3-year-old had a vocabulary of about 200 words and spoke in 3 to 4-word sentences. But not Trey. He rarely spoke one word, let alone 4 in a string. At least, not until today. Not until he'd met Axel. Her son had spoken. And he'd spoken to the one man from Penny's past that she had regrets about. Axel still had the power to draw her near. He was just so inexplicably appealing. That lean frame that looked like it could withstand the strongest storm, and probably had. Those dark as midnight eyes that had seen, and still saw, too much. Black hair with a rebellious glint of red in it. Everything about Axel Martinez was magnetic to her. In elementary school he'd been scrawny, squirrely, and smart-mouthed, which often made him a target of the bigger boys, as did the way he missed a lot of school, which prevented him from forming strong friendships. Those absences were because of his mother. Or at least, that's what Penny's mother told her the day she'd asked about Axel when he'd missed the class Valentine's Day party in the 5th grade. During that conversation, Penny's father had told her to stay away from kids like Axel. Kids with addicts for parents, he meant, as if it was a foregone conclusion that they'd become addicted, too. Then the Hollisters took Axel in and made him go to middle school on the regular. That was back when Sheriff Hollister had talked Axel's mother into entering rehab in Humboldt. No one had seen her in Seaglass Bay since. Not that folks had forgotten. Axel used to thumb his nose at anyone who held the specter of his mother against him. In school, he'd been determined to do things his way, speaking out when he wasn't supposed to, standing up to bullies without being asked to. Penny had admired his courage because she didn't have the same chutzpah. She'd followed the rules even if they didn't make sense, which meant she'd also gone along with the crowd, even if deep down she hadn't wanted to. And then there'd been that kiss during the high school graduation dance. That one fabulous kiss before Brett had pulled them apart and punched Axel in the face, knocking him to the ground and demanding he keep his grubby hands off Brett's girl. At the time, she hadn't been Brett's girlfriend, although things had been moving in that direction. Penny drew Trey closer, seeking comfort. Everything had changed that night. And not for the better, not in the long run, unless she counted Trey. But what if this was her do-over? Penny could help Axel find a location to open his own auto repair shop, one he could afford. That's what good realtors did. They found properties to fulfill people's dreams, whether it was for a home or a business. They didn't sit in the office and process paperwork for other realtors. Penny didn't move other than to draw in a deep breath. Axel didn't want her help. Just like Brett no longer wanted her. When something's defective, you send it back, Brett had told her. Penny held on tighter to her beautiful baby boy. He wasn't defective. Trey reached a hand toward the door and made a grabbing motion. Want him. Those few precious words. Tears filled Penny's eyes. You want Axel? Want Ax, Trey wailed. Gathering her courage, Penny scurried toward the door, flinging it open. For her son, she would do anything. Axel. Axel, wait. She ran into the parking lot. Wait. I'm still here. Axel was sitting on the tailgate of his white truck, peeling his coveralls from his legs. His work boots lay on the asphalt, along with balled-up black socks. Beneath his work clothes, he'd worn a blue t-shirt and black basketball shorts. He reached for a pair of black flip-flops. Do you need help locking up? The office door is tricky. You have to lift the handle before turning the mechanism. No, Penny glanced down at Trey, who was grinning at Axel. Can you tickle Trey again? Axel shot her a cautious look. Why? Because, Penny hesitated, protective of her secrets. But honestly, what did she have to lose? Trey talked to you. He rarely says more than one word at a time. Speech delay? Axel hopped down from the tailgate and gathered his work clothes and boots into a bundle that he tucked in the corner of the truck bed behind the cab. How do you know about speech delays? Penny's ex-husband hadn't known. My mother was unreliable. Alex framed his mother's situation so matter-of-factly, as if it was no big deal to be raised by a drug addict. I spent a lot of time in and out of foster homes with a variety of kids. Special needs. Speech delays. English as a second language. Kids with emotional setbacks. You name it. I've seen it. Axel grabbed a metal water bottle and took a long drink, during which time Penny's mind continued to be blown. He was so nonchalant about the whole thing. Have you taught him to sign? Yes. Penny drew a calming breath and stared into Trey's bright blue eyes, so full of intelligence and warmth, her heart aching with love and swelled with hope. Hope? She tried to believe Dr. Inman, but she hadn't had much in the way of hope materialize. Until today. Until Axel. Penny drew a calming breath. Please. Talk to him again. Penny settled Trey more securely on her hip. You want to talk to Axel, don't you, sweetie? Trey hid his head under her chin and held out his hand, 3 middle fingers curled toward his palm. He shook it from side to side. Yes, Penny translated, staring up at Axel with tear-filled eyes. Yes, he wants to talk to you. That's because I'm easy to talk to. Axel chucked Trey beneath his chin. Not that anybody outside of my foster family knows it, not even your mom, little man. Trey giggled but said nothing. Don't you want to say, bye, to Axel? Penny jiggled Trey a little, feeling a bit desperate for a repeat performance from her son. Geez, oh Pete, you're tense, Penny. Of course, he's not going to perform on command. Axel's phone buzzed in the truck. Hey, look. I've got family dinner in a few. Why don't you go inside and lock up? Me and Trey need to have a meeting of the minds. Axel held out his faintly grease-stained hands and Trey fell right into his arms. Penny's jaw dropped again. Not because Axel's hands weren't pristine, they were a working man's hands, but because her son didn't go easily to strangers. Penny? Pen? Axel reached over and nudged her chin upward with a gentle touch, closing her open mouth. I've got places to be and I'm sure your little man needs dinner. Right. She nodded. I'll go lock up. Don't forget the sippy cup. And to lift the office door handle. Axel turned away, pointing out things to her son. His tire. His truck. The seagull flying overhead. Bird fly, Trey said with certainty, earning Axel's praise. Penny's breath caught. Everything had changed for Penny the night Axel had kissed her. And not for the better. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe she could get her life back on track. She and Trey and. She didn't dare include Axel in that thought. But the idea hovered there like a single, sherbet-tinged cloud on the horizon of a brand new day. Chapter 2. Yes, on casserole, salad, and vegetables. No on breadsticks. Axel practically tumbled into his seat at the dining room table of his last and longest foster home just as food was being dished up. The old salt box hadn't changed in years. The creaky floors, the meant-to-be-lived-on furniture, the family photos. It was the closest thing Axel had to call home. The dining room table was where weighty things were discussed and celebrations shared with his foster family. Seth, the oldest of the foster boys, always sat to Clay's right, as he did now. Axel, among the youngest, had always sat to Lida's right, across from Jared, who nodded to Axel now. The Hollisters' fourth foster son was Van, who sat between Axel and Clay when he was home. His chair was empty. So much was the same, and yet, things had changed. Seth's teenage son Maddie often took Van's seat, although he was out with friends tonight. And Lida's chair was now Gail's. She and Clay were getting married in 2 weeks, selling their respective houses, and moving into something that would never be Axel's home. Although, legally, this wasn't his home either. Did you wash your hands? With a plate of food in front of him, Clay sat back in his chair, waiting for everyone to be seated to begin eating. He'd been a tall, imposing figure when he'd taken Axel in. Not much had changed since then, except the graying of his blonde hair. Gail stood at the opposite end of the table, dishing out Axel's plate the way Lida used to. Her dark hair brushed her shoulders, the same shoulders that had carried Axel and the Hollister men through the grief over losing Lida. She'd been their rock. Axel's a grown man, Clay. I'm sure he washed up. Yes, I did. I used the hall bathroom. Axel held out his hands, flipping them over and back the way he used to as a kid. I shaved today too, in case that matters, which it shouldn't, by the way. Long day at work? Seth's dark brown hair was crisply cut, his posture square and businesslike. I hear old man Abernathy brought his 1957 Chevy to Seaside Transmission for a rebuild. Is that why you're late? Technically, 5 minutes isn't late, not even when you punch a time card. Axel accepted his plate from Gail. I had some errands to run. And traffic was bad. Terrible, even. The summer tourists have arrived early this year. Don't you hate the tourists? I hate the tourists. Except the ones whose cars break down. He was babbling. He hadn't told his foster family about his dream of owning his own garage. They'd pepper him with questions and counsel. He wanted to do this on his own. To stop himself from saying more, Axel drank deeply from his water glass. Seth and Clay exchanged glances. Jared's eyebrows were raised. Axel swallowed a groan. Maybe we should hear more about those errands, Clay said slowly. You seem tightly wound. Axel set his glass down. Tightly wound is Seth's department. As boisterous was for Jared and strategic thinking was for Van. I just keep to myself, remember? Normally, yes. But you're very chatty today. Seth gave him the kind of look a police officer gave a potential perp, which was fitting considering he'd become sheriff when Clay retired. Axel hunched his shoulders and shoveled food in his mouth. Lida used to tease you boys about being chatty. Gail slid into her seat and laid a paper napkin across her lap. She said boys only become chatty when they're chasing girls. Jared snorted. Seth let out a bark of laughter. Axel choked on a bite of chicken and broccoli casserole. I'm sorry, Gail said immediately, placing a hand on Axel's shoulder. I was joking but you hit pay dirt. Seth crowed, setting Axel's teeth on edge. Tone it down, Seth, Jared cautioned. He and Axel were similar in age and watched out for each other. Tone it down? Seth was on a roll and not to be stopped. Don't you see what's happening here? Axel is running at the mouth? I'll bet he's found a date for the wedding. Nodding, Jared gave Axel an approving smile. Maybe. Leaning back, Clay studied Axel, who tried to ignore him. There was that time before he graduated that he was chatty. Because of a girl. Seth puffed out his chest. Axel sighed. Back then, Axel was so chatty that Lida and I thought he'd turned a corner, Clay said slowly, his gaze on his food. But then Axel came home with a black eye and became tight-lipped again. Not only that, but he was also extra quiet for weeks after that. Seth sat back in his chair, so like Clay in his body language they could have been blood family. Who was that girl he had the fight over? Penny. I don't recall. Jared covered for Axel. He'd been there that night and knew everything. But he was fighting with Brett Carlson. I hear he's still a jerk. Fighting, Clay shook his head. Hang on. I wasn't fighting. I did what you told me and didn't hit him back. Although Axel had wanted to. If truth be told, he still wanted to give Brett some payback, especially after meeting little Trey today and hearing about his delayed development. Penny had looked desperately hopeful when she told Axel about the boy's journey. In Axel's experience, the reason to look desperately hopeful came from being let down too many times by someone you were supposed to depend upon. In Axel's case, that had been his mother. And in Penny's case, he assumed it had been Brett. The jerk had stolen the innocent joy from her pretty blue eyes. One thing Brett had been unable to take from Penny was her beauty. Seeing her holding another man's child should have been a turnoff. Likewise, having her deliver the news that Dennis Hammond wouldn't seriously consider Axel's offer for the garage should have been a lust killer. But all seeing her had done was reawaken the attraction he'd felt toward Penny 10 years ago. "I was proud of you that day, Axel," Clay said in a gruff voice. Lida was too. "That's my boy," Lida seemed to whisper in Axel's head. Jared nodded toward Axel. "He should have decked Brett." "I would have." Immediately, Clay and Seth argued against violence. "What's done is done," Gail said, signaling for calm. "Lida told me that was the day she knew you were going to be all right, Axel. And look at you. You should be proud of yourself." Caught off guard for her praise, Axel couldn't think of a thing to say. All he'd done in the past 10 years was put in an honest day's work at various places around town where he could learn everything there was to know about repairing cars. Seth scoffed. "Axel was fine the day he walked through our front door. I made sure of that." That elicited chuckles and eye rolls from everyone at the table. "But that still doesn't answer the question about who made our little Axel such a chatty Cathy today." Seth speared a big piece of broccoli. "We're still waiting for your answer." "You're still waiting, you mean," Gail teased. "Some people like to keep their private lives private. This is a judgment-free zone." Clay regarded his fiancée fondly. While the assembled enjoyed a friendly round of bickering, Axel managed to clean his plate. "Thank you for the food. Family dinners are the best." He escaped to the kitchen and rinsed his plate. And then, because he felt guilty for rushing off, he put the rest of the casserole away and set the empty dish in the sink to soak. He was just about to escape out the back when Gail entered the kitchen. She set her plate on the counter, took one look at Axel, then crossed the kitchen, opened the back door, and gestured for him to follow her. That was unusual. Axel walked out and joined Gail on the rear porch swing, his arms crossed over his chest and his hands tucked in his armpits. The food was delicious. "Thank you. Like you tasted any of it." Gail tried to laugh, failed, and took Axel's hand, tugging his arms loose. "Is it me? Is that why you're bolting out of here? I know not all you boys are supportive of our marriage. I don't intend to take Lida's place in your heart or your father's." It was the kind of gesture a mother made to a son, the kind of gesture Lida had made to Axel too many times to count. The kind of gesture he couldn't recall his mother ever making. His mother. A woman who'd refused to relinquish her legal claim on Axel but had then dropped out of sight upon being released from rehab. Axel swallowed thickly. "It's not you." Gail withdrew her hand, clasping both of hers in her lap. "Before your father and I began dating, you, Maddie, and Seth would show up for family dinners and stay for an hour, sometimes longer. And now?" Much as Axel didn't want his foster family butting into his business, he knew what it felt like to be an outsider. He didn't want that for Gail. "I have a second job. I wasn't going to tell anyone because I didn't think I'd be working there long. Only long enough to build some extra money into his bank account to buy Seaglass Bay Automotive." "A second job? Why?" She leaned in closer, sending the swing a bit cockeyed. "Are you overextended? I have some money stashed away. I could." "It's not like that," he reassured her. She patiently waited to hear him tell her more. That was the thing about Gail. She had enough patience to outlast Axel's silences. When he wasn't chatty from seeing Penny, that is. "I've been saving to buy my own garage." The admission slipped out of Axel in a whisper, the way secrets someone wanted to keep private sometimes did. Gale squeezed his hand again. That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. Your mother would be proud of you, too. She gathered him into her arms for a quick hug, just as Lida would have done. Axel's throat constricted as if he was still that little boy taking care of an unreliable parent, trying so hard to hold their life together while guiltily dreaming about having a perfect mother and a life that was normal, safe, and respectable. He sat back, staring at the nearby blooming bougainvillea and Lida's red roses, needing space. Gale set her feet on the porch, halting the swing. You don't want to tell Clay or your brothers about starting your own business? Why not? I'm trying to do this on my own. Without Hollister endorsements or assistance. Gale nodded slowly. Can I tell you a story? Something inside Axel melted. This was why Lida and Gale had been friends. They were a lot alike, nurturing, steady, kind. And yet, they were different, too. There was the feeling that Gale was neutral, like Switzerland, rather than part of Clay's team, as Lida had been. When your mother first became ill, Gale began in a low voice. Lida didn't want to ask anyone for help. She didn't want to receive special treatment or be a burden to anyone. Axel nodded, remembering. But we all ignored her wishes and gave her our support, both emotionally and physically. That's what family does. They chip in. They lend a hand without being asked or despite being told to stay away. Gale drew a deep breath. You should tell them. They'd be happy for you. All due respect, Gale. Clay would want to weigh in on my decisions. And he wouldn't just want me to listen. He'd want me to take his advice. Same with Seth. It wouldn't matter that they'd never run their own businesses, unless he counted the sheriff's office. They'd want you to do it their way. Gale nodded, proving again that she understood. I'm beginning to see your point. The way she empathized. The tone and heavy cadence. Axel noted every worry line on her face. Clay does it to you too. He doesn't. I love him and we get along fine. Gale tried to deny it, but there was no conviction in her words. And suddenly, Axel remembered something she'd mentioned months ago at the dinner table. You wanted a bridal shower, a rehearsal dinner, and a special honeymoon. All the trappings given to a bride. Oh, that. Gale looked away, glancing toward the garden with a slight frown. I'm too old for those things. Plus we've both been married before, even if the last time I got hitched was a courthouse elopement. This last was said with ill-disguised remorse before she plowed on with forced cheer. Anyway. Why do I need a bridal shower? A popular bar and grill in town. And Seth hired an event planner. Who was only planning the ceremony and reception, not anything leading up to the big event. I hear Clay's practical voice in your words. Axel stood, staring at the caring woman who'd won his foster father's heart. My best advice to you since you're marrying Clay is to be true to yourself. I know he's a good partner to you, that you have a great relationship. But your needs should be met too. You're not just mending his broken heart with your love, but he should be instinctively fulfilling your heart's desires, too. Gale stayed quiet for a long moment, and he made a move to return to the house. Hang on. She caught his hand. I've always meant to ask. Why do you call your father Clay? Hurt bawled in his gut as Axel headed toward the side yard. Because he didn't fight for me. Trey's giggles filled Penny's small apartment while she made dinner and checked real estate listings on her phone. Penny had been unable to shake Axel's disappointment about the auto shop being out of reach. She was determined to help him find a good property to open his business, whether his pride wouldn't let him admit he wanted her help or not. Things are going to be different from now on, she murmured, stirring the boiling noodles. She was going to be more proactive about her real estate career, rather than being the backup for her father and other agents. Helping Axel was a great way to start. It had nothing to do with how he inspired Trey to be more verbal or how he lit a fire deep inside of Penny that had gone out after her divorce, or if she was to be honest with herself, long before her divorce. In the living room, Maple, their dachshund, let out a playful sound, half whine, half growl. "Trey, are you and Maple playing nice?" Her son sometimes hugged the dog too tight. "Yes," came Trey's verbal reply. The word in itself was new and made Penny's heart soar with happiness. A small ball bounced into the kitchen. Maple charged in after it, wagging her tail happily as she picked it up and trotted back to the living room. Penny's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Brett. "Hanson has the sniffles. You should keep Trey this weekend." Hanson was Brett's other biological son and almost the same age as Trey. Penny released a long breath. She'd gladly keep Trey and shower him with all the love his father didn't give him. She opened her calendar app and made note that Brett had once more given up his visitation rights. That was 6 times this year. Once a month, almost like clockwork. It wasn't that Penny was going to challenge Brett for sole custody. But she had ammunition in case Brett decided he and his new bride wanted Trey on a more permanent basis. He was that kind of entitled man. If she'd chosen Axel 10 years ago and their marriage had fallen apart, she'd have more trust in Axel than she did in Brett. And wasn't that telling? She sent back a brief affirmative reply to her ex and then drained the noodles, realizing that Trey and Maple were too quiet. She hurried to the living room where she found Trey climbing the bookshelf like a jungle gym. Maple sat watching him. Thankfully, the shelf was attached firmly to the wall. Also, thankfully, Trey was skilled at scaling the bookshelf, not that she in any way approved of the exercise. "Hey, my little monkey. No climbing in the house, remember?" She plucked him into the safety of her arms. "No, mama." Another 2-word sentence that thrilled her. Top, top, top. Regardless of her happiness in the words tumbling from her son's lips, there was safety to be considered and a schedule to keep. It's time for dinner. And then bath time, bedtime, and a few cherished moments of quiet for Penny. No, Trey also made the sign, tapping his index and middle finger against his thumb. Yes. Penny wasn't about to get upset at his rebellious attitude if he was talking. You need to feed Maple. Look at her. She's so hungry she might just eat her ball if you don't feed her. She carried Trey into the kitchen, followed by a prancing Maple. The little dog ran right to her bowl, wriggling with excitement at the prospect of dinner. No, Trey said again, crossing his arms over his chest much the same way Axel had at the garage today. I go top. A distraction was called for. If you feed Maple and eat your dinner, we can get ice cream. Penny said the words, simultaneously signing them. Trey slumped in defeat, dropping his hands and lowering his shoulders. He gave Maple a scoop of dog food and then climbed into his seat at the small kitchen table, sitting on the booster in his chair. A short time later, Penny was driving them to the deep-sea diner. It'd be a quick trip, one that would delay Trey's bedtime by an hour. But today was a celebration, after all. Trey was talking and Penny was taking her career seriously. The road ahead was flat and clear. And then the car sputtered and chugged as if overtaken by a coughing fit. And then the coughing fit overcame the engine and it died. Thankfully, the car had enough momentum for Penny to pull onto a less busy side street and park. Shoot! Penny tried several times to restart the car, but to no avail. She glanced in the rearview mirror. Trey's eyes were closed, his sweet face tilted to one side in slumber. She called her insurance's tow truck service, relieved when the dispatcher said someone would be there right away. If she'd taken her job more seriously, she could afford a new car, or at least, a reliable car. While she waited for the tow truck, Penny searched more real estate listings in Seaglass Bay, looking for something that would fit Axel's needs and budget, an amount she'd arbitrarily set for him. A tow truck pulled up in front of her. That was fast. Penny got out to meet the driver, whose smile was heart-poundingly familiar. Axel? I thought you had a family dinner. I did. And then a shift for the tow company. He glanced at her car with an assessing look in his eye. What seems to be the problem? She related the car's symptoms as she handed over the keys. Trey's asleep in the back. We were going to get ice cream. Let's see if I can fix it before he wakes up and wonders where his dessert is. Axel got behind the wheel but couldn't get the car to start either. He popped the hood and came around to the front to look at the engine. Why don't you sit in the front seat and turn it over when I'm ready? Sure. He was so calm about her breakdown, not blaming her as Brett would have done, even though it wasn't her fault. Her ex found fault in everything about Penny. Axel got some tools from the tow truck and began taking things apart. His hands and arms were strong, dexterous, and, dare she think it, sexy. 10 years ago, he placed those hands on her shoulders, looking deep into her eyes before sliding his hands around her back, drawing her close, and kissing her tenderly. Penny sighed. Axel knew his way around a woman, an engine, and who knew what else. Axel leaned around the hood to look at her. Turn it over. I bet this engine hums now. Forget the engine. She was humming. Penny fumbled with the keys, embarrassed by her train of thought. The engine caught immediately without a cough or a gasp. Axel lowered the hood and came to stand outside her car door, leaning down to smile at her. Your air filter was caked with dirt and filled with leaves. It looks like it hasn't been changed in 10 years. Do you park under a tree? Every day at the office. Her car was 10 years old, and Brett had been in charge of servicing it, so this little hiccup came as no surprise. Thank you so much. She extended her credit card toward him. His smile disappeared. No charge. And if you buy a new air filter, I'll change it. Also no charge. A part of her rebelled at his charity. Let me buy you an ice cream, then. Trey would love to see you. Axel hesitated. Come on. You must have a break or something coming up. And I owe you. For more than help with her car. She owed him for what happened 10 years ago. I insist. Are you going to the deep sea diner? There was uncertainty in his eyes. She didn't want him to look uncertain when he looked at her. But she knew that to get to that point, they needed to talk about what had happened a decade ago. And that wasn't a conversation for the very public deep sea diner. This is not a date, Axel muttered to himself as he parked at the far end of the deep sea diner's parking lot. He'd called dispatch and told them he was taking an early dinner break. Penny just wants to thank me, not date me. All the same, his heart beat a little faster. Axel hopped down and walked over to Penny's car. She was getting Trey out of his safety seat. The deep sea diner was busy. He saw Seth's teenage son Maddie, in a window booth with his friends, including his girlfriend Kimberly. They all seemed to look his way. This is a bad idea, Axel said, imagining Seth teasing him at their next family dinner. Ice cream is never a bad idea. Penny lifted Trey to her hip and shut the rear car door. The whole town will be talking about us by morning. Including Brett. Axel backed up. I don't want to cause you any trouble. Penny frowned. You aren't any trouble. You've never been any trouble. She rolled her shoulders back. If anything, I caused you grief and water under the bridge. Axel didn't want to talk about the past. Fudge and nuts. Excuse me? That's what I like on my ice cream. Where was his cool? He reached for Trey as if he had every right to carry her kid around. She didn't hand him over. If you walk in the deep sea diner carrying Trey, people will talk. He grimaced but was already accepting the inevitable. I can handle gossip. He'd learned early to let most of it slide off his back. It was the hurts caused by exclusion that he carried around. Look, I'm either going to carry Trey or pay for ice cream. Your choice. You're not paying. I invited you. Penny handed over the slumbering toddler. Why don't you get us a table outside on the oceanside patio? I'll go in and pay. He nodded, carrying the boy to a table on the west side of the restaurant. The sun was going down and the breeze coming off the ocean was kicking up. Axel turned his back on the horizon to shelter Trey from the wind. If things had gone differently 10 years ago, this kid would have been mine. Well, not this kid. Trey stirred, blinking at his surroundings, aiming sleepy eyes up at Axel. Ax. That's right. We're having ice cream. Your mom should be back any minute. Ax. Trey came more fully awake. He placed his 2 palms on Axel's cheeks, excitement in his wide eyes. Truck. 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 You like trucks, do you? Axel smiled. I'm driving another truck tonight. A bigger truck. The kid would get a kick out of sitting in the cab of the tow truck. Penny sat across from them, placing a tray with their orders on the table. Why are you driving a tow truck? I thought you worked at Seaside Transmission. I'm saving for, Axel shrugged, setting Trey on the bench next to him and handing the toddler a plastic bowl shaped like a seashell with a scoop of vanilla ice cream inside. He claimed his sundae with fudge sauce and nuts, and some of the napkins, which he anchored on the table with his truck keys. You know why I'm saving? A rainy day, apparently, since his money didn't seem to be any good in Seaglass Bay. She scooped the cherry from the swirl of whipped cream on top of her strawberry milkshake almost without taking her eyes off Axel. I want to talk to you about that. Axel perked up. Did Mr. Hammond change his mind? No. But I'd like to help you look for a place to open your own shop. The wind blew her blonde hair away from her face. I'd hate to see you give up on your dream. Axel shook his head. Everybody takes their broken cars to Hammond's. If I open a shop, they won't come. That's not. You've got a drip on your chin, baby. Penny reached across the table, plucked a napkin from beneath Axel's keys, and waved it toward her son, who took the napkin but did nothing with it. That's not true, Axel. It is, and you know it, Axel said evenly. If I want my own shop, I need to move. Maybe somewhere like Humboldt where no one knows me. Not that he wanted to leave. Not that much of anything was keeping him here except his foster family. His gaze traced the curve of Penny's lips. Longing seemed to trace a path around his foolish heart. Wow. Penny put a straw between those lips he couldn't stop looking at and drank her milkshake. The Axel I grew up with would be determined to prove everyone wrong. I told you. Axel wiped the ice cream dripping down Trey's chin before it fell on his shirt, earning a glowing smile from Penny. I've changed. I'm more of a realist now. A man who knew his place, which was nowhere near the woman sitting across from him. Don't you dare talk down to yourself, Alexander. Penny scoffed. Realists take facts into account. They crunch numbers. I'm going to prove you can open a business here. Penny glanced at the other patrons on the seaside patio. Michael. Penny waved at Michael Britton, who'd graduated with them and sat at the next table with his wife and kids. What do you think of Axel opening his own auto repair shop? Would you take your car to him? Heck. Yeah. Michael flashed Axel a quick smile. He helped my wife change her flat tire at the beach one afternoon. You think old man Hammond would do that? No way, Michael's wife answered for them. Penny turned the other way, spotting another of their former classmates, this one sitting by himself. And how about you, Daniel? Would you take your car to Axel if he opened a repair shop? Mouthful of onion rings, Daniel nodded, swallowed, and explained himself, I'd go to the guy who helped me start my junker in the high school parking lot after a football game before anyone else. Glad to help, man. Axel caught another drip from Trey's chin. See? Penny said triumphantly. Get over the past, Axel. His cell phone buzzed with a call from dispatch. Break's over. Thanks for the ice cream. He took a last bite, savoring the sundae's sweetness and the determined glint in Penny's blue eyes. We're not done with our discussion. Penny pounded her plastic milkshake cup on the table a few times, like a judge pounding a gavel to get their way. If I can't buy the best repair shop in town, I think we are. Axel chucked Trey beneath the chin. Be good, little man. Yes. Trey nodded. I'm good. You're good, too, Axel, Penny told him. I wish you could see it. Her words stuck with Axel throughout his shift. The next day, the wind coming off the ocean was cool and determined to drive Axel away from the beach. He was having none of it. Why does everything have to be an uphill battle? Axel pushed on, marching to a picnic bench tucked away on the stretch of sea glass beach where he liked to eat his lunch. He turned off the music playing in his ear, content to listen to the ocean. Kids laughed and shouted as they splashed in the waves. Somewhere, music played, tune indistinct above the crashing waves and the whoosh of the wind. Seagulls swooped and squawked. Beach noise was a welcome change from the roar of engines and whine of machinery at Seaside Transmission. Axel sat down on the picnic bench and unlaced his work boots, thinking one of the voices from the beach sounded like his name had been called. He disregarded that thought. No one ever called to him down here. He swung his feet around, dug his toes in the sand, and opened his lunch bag. Alexander! Penny appeared at the paved sidewalk a few feet away, out of breath. She wore a fancy blue dress and those same black high heels she'd had on yesterday. I chased you all the way from Seaside Transmission. Didn't you hear me? Axel pointed to his earbuds. I was listening to music. While you power walked down here. Penny slipped off her shoes and approached, every step a tantalizing sway of hips. She brushed sand off the picnic bench on her side and sat daintily across from him. Thanks for the workout. You're welcome. Axel set out his lunch. A double-decker turkey and cheese sandwich, potato salad, and 2 pears. Why are you stalking me? Her mouth hung open a moment. This has nothing to do with. He raised an eyebrow, biting back a smile when her cheeks bloomed a soft, attractive pink. Penny leaned her forearms on the picnic table. I told you. I want to be your realtor. Axel wanted to replace realtor with another noun, like girlfriend or lover. But he knew better than to wish for things he couldn't have. I don't want to waste your time. I have time to spare. She rolled those baby blues like they were still in high school. Currently, my dad has me working as his assistant, even though I have my license. Frankly, since the divorce, I was happy with the role. But now, she paused, shifting on the bench, lowering her voice as if they weren't alone and she didn't want anyone to hear her confession. I want to step it up. It's just that. No one who comes to Bell Realty wants to hire me as their agent. You'd be doing me a favor by letting me help you. Axel chewed on his sandwich and on her words while the sounds of the beach filled the silence between them. You need me, he said finally. We need each other. She rolled her eyes again, looking adorable. Axel, you have big dreams. But to get there, you need to start out small. I can help you. Axel took his time replying. I'm listening. There are several other properties for sale locally that might work for you. Ones with 3 service bays? That was his dream, after all. No. Ones with lifts? No. Axel sighed. He wasn't fond of working underneath a vehicle lying on his back. Not interested. Penny tossed her hands. Can you at least look? Now? This is my lunch break. And what she'd found didn't sound like they fit his dream at all. After work? I've got a tow truck shift again tonight. Axel finished his sandwich and offered her a pear. Penny accepted his gift, but not his brush off. You're going to get your own shop, Axel. I'm going to make sure of it. Are you working tomorrow night? He shook his head. Then it's settled. I'll set everything up for the property viewings and text you the schedule. She handed him her business card. All I need is your phone number. He chewed slowly, looking at her as if he had all the time in the world to just look. And remember that kiss a decade ago. And the bloody aftermath. Because it was important to remember that he was Axel Martinez, and that she was Penny Belle Carlson from the other side of town. The only way they had a future together was if he moved to her side of town. And to do that, he'd need an engine repair shop with 3 service bays. Perhaps aware of the divide between them, her gaze swept the table, avoiding him. Are you going to the high school reunion dinner and dance on Friday? No, Axel recoiled so hard he nearly fell backward off the picnic bench. Why would I? Penny's gaze found his. There was a plea in those blue eyes. To reconnect with old friends. He frowned slightly. He avoided socializing with his former classmates. Some of the teachers and administration are coming back too. His frown hardened. He'd frequently spent time in the principal's office and even more time in detention, sent there by teachers. Where are you going with this? Penny looked like she was having a hard time holding on to her smile. It fell twice before she said, "We should go together." No, Axel checked the time on his phone, making sure he wouldn't be late returning. Why would I want to reacquaint myself with high school bullies, the royal court, and staff who didn't like me? Because, Penny hesitated, lips parted slightly in that way of hers he was coming to recognize as shock. Because I need someone to have my back. It's not going to be easy for me either. Because Brett is going with his new wife? Axel guessed. Don't go, Penny. From where I'm sitting, anything would be better than attending the reunion, even hosting a bridal shower for Gail. His words drifted off into the wind, like his dreams and Gail's. Somebody should give her a bridal shower, he added as an afterthought. She deserves one. I could do it. Penny pounced on the idea. I could throw Gail a shower if you look at the properties I have in mind and go to the reunion with me. Axel nearly fell off the bench again. You can't throw Gail a shower. It should be given by one of her girlfriends. Or her soon-to-be stepson, Penny said with a bright smile. He didn't understand her optimism. It threw a curveball that made him ignore the stepson label. It's too late. There are less than 2 weeks until the wedding. It's not too late. I can make it happen. She seemed so certain, just as certain as when she talked about him opening his own business. How does Saturday sound? Axel rubbed at the furrows in his brow. This is a lot to throw at a man on his lunch hour. Life comes at you fast, Axel. If you don't keep up, you'll be left behind. She stood, smoothing her dress and giving him a smile the likes of which a young Penny Belle had never given him before, confident, triumphant, sexy. We'll start looking at properties tomorrow night. You'll need to pick me up at 5 for the reunion Friday. Wear a tie. I'll make all the arrangements for Gail's shower this weekend. You just need to send me a guest list and get her there. But, Axel couldn't think of a single argument he hadn't already tried. Penny walked barefoot to the sidewalk, then balanced on one foot as she put on first one high heel and then another. Hoo boy. Axel swallowed longing. He swallowed hope. But he didn't swallow either hard enough. Penny walked away without looking back, as if she was certain Axel would do everything she asked. Funny thing was, he wanted to. Chapter 3. This is not a date, Axel muttered to himself as he parked at the far end of the Deep Sea Diner's parking lot. He'd called dispatch and told them he was taking an early dinner break. Penny just wants to thank me, not date me. All the same, his heart beat a little faster. Axel hopped down and walked over to Penny's car. She was getting Trey out of his safety seat. The Deep Sea Diner was busy. He saw Seth's teenage son Maddie, in a window booth with his friends, including his girlfriend Kimberly. They all seemed to look his way. This is a bad idea, Axel said, imagining Seth teasing him at their next family dinner. Ice cream is never a bad idea. Penny lifted Trey to her hip and shut the rear car door. The whole town will be talking about us by morning. Including Brett. Axel backed up. I don't want to cause you any trouble. Penny frowned. You aren't any trouble. You've never been any trouble. She rolled her shoulders back. If anything, I caused you grief, Anne. Water under the bridge. Axel didn't want to talk about the past. Fudge and nuts. Excuse me? That's what I like on my ice cream. Where was his cool? He reached for Trey as if he had every right to carry her kid around. She didn't hand him over. If you walk in the deep-sea diner carrying Trey, people will talk. He grimaced but was already accepting the inevitable. I can handle gossip. He'd learned early to let most of it slide off his back. It was the hurts caused by exclusion that he carried around. Look, I'm either going to carry Trey or pay for ice cream. Your choice. You're not paying. I invited you. Penny handed over the slumbering toddler. Why don't you get us a table outside on the oceanside patio? I'll go in and pay. He nodded, carrying the boy to a table on the west side of the restaurant. The sun was going down and the breeze coming off the ocean was kicking up. Axel turned his back on the horizon to shelter Trey from the wind. If things had gone differently 10 years ago, this kid would have been mine. Well, not this kid. Trey stirred, blinking at his surroundings, aiming sleepy eyes up at Axel. Ax. That's right. We're having ice cream. Your mom should be back any minute. Ax. Trey came more fully awake. He placed his 2 palms on Axel's cheeks, excitement in his wide eyes. Truck. 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 You like trucks, do you? Axel smiled. I'm driving another truck tonight. A bigger truck. The kid would get a kick out of sitting in the cab of the tow truck. Penny sat across from them, placing a tray with their orders on the table. Why are you driving a tow truck? I thought you worked at Seaside Transmission. I'm saving for, Axel shrugged, setting Trey on the bench next to him and handing the toddler a plastic bowl shaped like a seashell with a scoop of vanilla ice cream inside. He claimed his sundae with fudge sauce and nuts, and some of the napkins, which he anchored on the table with his truck keys. You know why I'm saving? A rainy day, apparently, since his money didn't seem to be any good in Seaglass Bay. She scooped the cherry from the swirl of whipped cream on top of her strawberry milkshake almost without taking her eyes off Axel. I want to talk to you about that. Axel perked up. Did Mr. Hammond change his mind? No. But I'd like to help you look for a place to open your own shop. The wind blew her blonde hair away from her face. I'd hate to see you give up on your dream. Axel shook his head. Everybody takes their broken cars to Hammond's. If I open a shop, they won't come. That's not. You've got a drip on your chin, baby. Penny reached across the table, plucked a napkin from beneath Axel's keys, and waved it toward her son, who took the napkin but did nothing with it. That's not true, Axel. It is, and you know it, Axel said evenly. If I want my own shop, I need to move. Maybe somewhere like Humboldt where no one knows me. Not that he wanted to leave. Not that much of anything was keeping him here except his foster family. His gaze traced the curve of Penny's lips. Longing seemed to trace a path around his foolish heart. Wow. Penny put a straw between those lips he couldn't stop looking at and drank her milkshake. The Axel I grew up with would be determined to prove everyone wrong. I told you. Axel wiped the ice cream dripping down Trey's chin before it fell on his shirt, earning a glowing smile from Penny. I've changed. I'm more of a realist now. A man who knew his place, which was nowhere near the woman sitting across from him. Don't you dare talk down to yourself, Alexander. Penny scoffed. Realists take facts into account. They crunch numbers. I'm going to prove you can open a business here. Penny glanced at the other patrons on the seaside patio. Michael. Penny waved at Michael Britton, who'd graduated with them and sat at the next table with his wife and kids. What do you think of Axel opening his own auto repair shop? Would you take your car to him? Heck.
Yeah.
Michael flashed Axel a quick smile. He helped my wife change her flat tire at the beach one afternoon. You think old man Hammond would do that? No way, Michael's wife answered for them. Penny turned the other way, spotting another of their former classmates, this one sitting by himself. And how about you, Daniel? Would you take your car to Axel if he opened a repair shop? Mouthful of onion rings, Daniel nodded, swallowed, and explained himself, I'd go to the guy who helped me start my junker in the high school parking lot after a football game before anyone else. Glad to help, man. Axel caught another drip from Trey's chin. See? Penny said triumphantly. Get over the past, Axel. His cell phone buzzed with a call from dispatch. Break's over. Thanks for the ice cream. He took a last bite, savoring the sundae's sweetness and the determined glint in Penny's blue eyes. We're not done with our discussion. Penny pounded her plastic milkshake cup on the table a few times, like a judge pounding a gavel to get their way. If I can't buy the best repair shop in town, I think we are. Axel chucked Trey beneath the chin. Be good, little man. Yes. Trey nodded. I'm good. You're good, too, Axel, Penny told him. I wish you could see it. Her words stuck with Axel throughout his shift. The next day, the wind coming off the ocean was cool and determined to drive Axel away from the beach. He was having none of it. Why does everything have to be an uphill battle? Axel pushed on, marching to a picnic bench tucked away on the stretch of sea glass beach where he liked to eat his lunch. He turned off the music playing in his ear, content to listen to the ocean. Kids laughed and shouted as they splashed in the waves. Somewhere, music played, tune indistinct above the crashing waves and the whoosh of the wind. Seagulls swooped and squawked. Beach noise was a welcome change from the roar of engines and whine of machinery at Seaside Transmission. Axel sat down on the picnic bench and unlaced his work boots, thinking one of the voices from the beach sounded like his name had been called. He disregarded that thought. No one ever called to him down here. He swung his feet around, dug his toes in the sand, and opened his lunch bag. Alexander! Penny appeared at the paved sidewalk a few feet away, out of breath. She wore a fancy blue dress and those same black high heels she'd had on yesterday. I chased you all the way from Seaside Transmission. Didn't you hear me? Axel pointed to his earbuds. I was listening to music. While you power walked down here. Penny slipped off her shoes and approached, every step a tantalizing sway of hips. She brushed sand off the picnic bench on her side and sat daintily across from him. Thanks for the workout. You're welcome. Axel set out his lunch. A double-decker turkey and cheese sandwich, potato salad, and 2 pears. Why are you stalking me? Her mouth hung open a moment. This has nothing to do with. He raised an eyebrow, biting back a smile when her cheeks bloomed a soft, attractive pink. Penny leaned her forearms on the picnic table. I told you. I want to be your realtor. Axel wanted to replace realtor with another noun, like girlfriend or lover. But he knew better than to wish for things he couldn't have. I don't want to waste your time. I have time to spare. She rolled those baby blues like they were still in high school. Currently, my dad has me working as his assistant, even though I have my license. Frankly, since the divorce, I was happy with the role. But now, she paused, shifting on the bench, lowering her voice as if they weren't alone and she didn't want anyone to hear her confession. I want to step it up. It's just that. No one who comes to Bell Realty wants to hire me as their agent. You'd be doing me a favor by letting me help you. Axel chewed on his sandwich and on her words while the sounds of the beach filled the silence between them. You need me, he said finally. We need each other. She rolled her eyes again, looking adorable. Axel, you have big dreams. But to get there, you need to start out small. I can help you. Axel took his time replying. I'm listening. There are several other properties for sale locally that might work for you. Ones with 3 service bays? That was his dream, after all. No. Ones with lifts? No. Axel sighed. He wasn't fond of working underneath a vehicle lying on his back. Not interested. Penny tossed her hands. Can you at least look? Now? This is my lunch break. And what she'd found didn't sound like they fit his dream at all. After work? I've got a tow truck shift again tonight. Axel finished his sandwich and offered her a pear. Penny accepted his gift, but not his brush off. You're going to get your own shop, Axel. I'm going to make sure of it. Are you working tomorrow night? He shook his head. Then it's settled. I'll set everything up for the property viewings and text you the schedule. She handed him her business card. All I need is your phone number. He chewed slowly, looking at her as if he had all the time in the world to just look. And remember that kiss a decade ago. And the bloody aftermath. Because it was important to remember that he was Axel Martinez, and that she was Penny Belle Carlson from the other side of town. The only way they had a future together was if he moved to her side of town. And to do that, he'd need an engine repair shop with 3 service bays. Perhaps aware of the divide between them, her gaze swept the table, avoiding him. Are you going to the high school reunion dinner and dance on Friday? No, Axel recoiled so hard he nearly fell backward off the picnic bench. Why would I? Penny's gaze found his. There was a plea in those blue eyes. To reconnect with old friends. He frowned slightly. He avoided socializing with his former classmates. Some of the teachers and administration are coming back too. His frown hardened. He'd frequently spent time in the principal's office and even more time in detention, sent there by teachers. Where are you going with this? Penny looked like she was having a hard time holding on to her smile. It fell twice before she said, we should go together. No, Axel checked the time on his phone, making sure he wouldn't be late returning. Why would I want to reacquaint myself with high school bullies, the royal court, and staff who didn't like me? Because, Penny hesitated, lips parted slightly in that way of hers he was coming to recognize as shock. Because I need someone to have my back. It's not going to be easy for me either. Because Brett is going with his new wife? Axel guessed. Don't go, Penny. From where I'm sitting, anything would be better than attending the reunion, even hosting a bridal shower for Gail. His words drifted off into the wind, like his dreams and Gail's. Somebody should give her a bridal shower, he added as an afterthought. She deserves one. I could do it. Penny pounced on the idea. I could throw Gail a shower if you look at the properties I have in mind and go to the reunion with me. Axel nearly fell off the bench again. You can't throw Gail a shower. It should be given by one of her girlfriends. Or her soon-to-be stepson, Penny said with a bright smile. He didn't understand her optimism. It threw a curveball that made him ignore the stepson label. It's too late. There are less than 2 weeks until the wedding. It's not too late. I can make it happen. She seemed so certain, just as certain as when she talked about him opening his own business. How does Saturday sound? Axel rubbed at the furrows in his brow. This is a lot to throw at a man on his lunch hour. Life comes at you fast, Axel. If you don't keep up, you'll be left behind. She stood, smoothing her dress and giving him a smile the likes of which a young Penny Belle had never given him before, confident, triumphant, sexy. We'll start looking at properties tomorrow night. You'll need to pick me up at 5 for the reunion Friday. Wear a tie. I'll make all the arrangements for Gail's shower this weekend. You just need to send me a guest list and get her there. But Axel couldn't think of a single argument he hadn't already tried. Penny walked barefoot to the sidewalk, then balanced on one foot as she put on first one high heel and then another. Hoo boy. Axel swallowed longing. He swallowed hope. But he didn't swallow either hard enough. Penny walked away without looking back, as if she was certain Axel would do everything she asked. Funny thing was, he wanted to. Chapter 4. What are you doing here? Axel eyed Penny suspiciously when she was waiting for him outside the transmission shop at noon the next day. He looked ruggedly handsome in his stained work coveralls with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Penny stuffed her attraction back in its hiding place. She'd had the best success with Axel yesterday when she was commanding. Falling to his charm would get her nowhere. You didn't send me a guest list for the shower. She fell into step next to him as he headed for the beach, presumably to his shaded picnic table. I need you to make some decisions about cake, decorations, adult beverages, games, and before this gets out of hand, I have to talk to Gail. He walked faster, lengthening his strides, as if he could outwalk Penny and her demands. It was a good thing Penny had worn red ballet flats with her long blue dress today. It gave her a better chance of keeping up. Okay. You can call Gail while you eat lunch. This isn't the kind of conversation you have over the phone when it's out of the blue. Axel sounded prickly. Are you chickening out? Penny grabbed onto his shoulder, a little breathless from his power walk. She stared into those dark chocolate eyes, seeking the truth. You are. He heaved a sigh. Penny, there was so much emotion in his voice, just in those two syllables. And his eyes. You're afraid. Of what? He began walking again. She didn't let go of his arm, dragging behind him like a too small anchor chained to a large, powerful yacht. Axel glanced down at her hand. Penny still didn't let go. He heaved another sigh. When I was a kid, every day was different. There was no routine. His tone was as taut as a stretched wire. I never knew what to expect when I came home from school. That's why you didn't come to school some days. He nodded, checking for traffic before crossing the road to the beach. It was less stressful to me to be there through my mom's ups and downs and emotions, because I was used to that, but when I opened our apartment door never knowing if she was going to be there. Or not. That was harder. Penny could only imagine what he meant by, or not. She squeezed his arm, wishing she could ease the pain of his past. And when I did go to school, I was never sure where I stood. The kids all had their friends and you didn't fit in. And worse, his clothes never seemed to be the right size. They certainly had never been a current style. At least, not until you were taken in by the Hollisters. Yeah. Axel drew Penny down the path to the picnic table that was partially hidden beneath a cluster of pines. Clay and Lita gave me a traditional home, one with rules and routines. I like knowing where I fit into things. And I like routine. And everything I proposed is anything but routine. Penny's spirits sank. She'd been banking on Axel to jumpstart her career and ease the awkwardness of the reunion. Yes. It's all very sudden, I'm not good with surprises or impulsive decisions. He sat down on the bench and removed his work boots. I'm glad you understand. Penny sat across from him. I understand, but that doesn't mean you're off the hook on anything. She'd been looking forward to, hopefully, another kiss this weekend, never expecting him to back out of their deal. Axel gave her a long-suffering look. Penny was at a crossroad. She could either give in, like the good little girl she'd been all her life, following the path of least resistance. Or she could be bold, which was what she'd admired in Axel and Brett when she was a teenager. Penny closed her eyes, thinking about the example she wanted to set for Trey, who was spending the day with her mother. She wanted to be bold and go after what she wanted, so that her child would do the same. There was just the trepidation inside her to be dealt with. Be bold. Take charge. Penny swallowed, opened her eyes and stood, walking around the table to sit next to Axel. From her seat, she could see the beach and the ocean. But no one was close. No one could hear what she had to say. You and me, Axel. We always feel safer in the background. We're not like the carefree vacationers out there or the achievers whose touch turns everything into gold. You've had a less than normal childhood which made you more careful than most. And I've let others make decisions for me for so long that when Brett left me, I didn't know what to do. So she'd done practically nothing. But that all changed the other day when I met you at the garage. You have a dream, and it reminded me that I should have dreams too. I don't take any responsibility for that. You probably felt relieved that Trey started speaking. My impetus for change was a combination of seeing you again, hearing your dreams, and watching Trey blossom. Be bold. Also, Penny turned to Axel and kissed him. He didn't lurch back in surprise or horror. His arm came around her tenderly until his hand rested on her hip. He kissed her long, slow, and deep, without any of the heat of their long-ago kiss or any of the passion she'd expected from this sexy, complicated man. Penny drew back, caught up in the warmth in his eyes. Hi. Hi. He gave her a wry smile. Well, that is one way to convince me the unexpected can be good. I guess this means I'm looking for a place to open up shop, you have a date for the reunion, and Gail is going to have a bridal shower. Axel sighed, but this time it seemed more for dramatic effect than because he was unhappy. Show me your ideas for the shower while I eat. I'll get you that list tonight. Penny dug her phone from her purse. You won't regret this. I already do. Who requested access to the Parnell property on 7th? Penny's father came out of his office after Penny had seen Axel. He scanned the two other agents present, skipping over Penny. Is there a problem? Penny stood, knees suddenly weak. Other than the fact that I wasn't informed? No. Dad shook his head. I requested access codes to the Parnell lockbox. Penny squared her shoulders. And two other properties. Her father approached Penny's desk. Which realtor asked you to arrange showings? Dad glanced around the office. Be bold. No one, Dad. I have a client of my own. A handsome client who kissed like a dream and made her heart pound. You? Her father's brow clouded. Yes. Penny locked her knees and swiped at her suddenly hot cheeks. I thought it was time I became more proactive. Everyone in the office was silent, including her father. And then he broke out in a grin. Excellent. Who's the client? Axel. Alexander Martinez. Dad's grin faded. He's not worth your time if he still goes by that hoodlum nickname. We don't take on clients who can't afford property. Be bold. He's saved up to buy a business, Dad. That makes him legit. Penny scoffed to cover her nerves. Besides, what's in a name? Don't you still call Dennis Hammond the Hammer? That's different. Dad's arms were crossed, and his features closed off. It's not, and you know it. Penny mirrored his body language, thinking of Axel, channeling his chip-on-my-shoulder attitude. You always said you wanted me to take over Bell Realty when you retire. Everyone who walks through that door who asks for you can buy anything they want. If I want clients to ask for me, I need to start small. I know what I'm doing. You just have to trust me. After a moment, her dad nodded. It was a powerful moment for Penny. She had her father's support. And Axel's. What could possibly go wrong? Chapter 5. Running late. I'll pick you up at 7. Axel stared at Penny's text long enough that Gail noticed. Important message? Gail served Axel a slice of chocolate bundt cake at the dinner table. None of his foster brothers were around. He'd come by the house after work to broach the subject of Gail's bridal shower. A real estate agent wants to show me some options to open my own repair shop. That's a big step, son. Clay lowered his fork. Are you ready to manage something like that? Of course, he is, Gail said staunchly. Unbidden, old resentments rose to the surface. I'm ready for a lot of things you wouldn't expect from me, Clay, like starting a business and dating someone with a kid. I'm even throwing Gail a bridal shower this weekend. Gail and Clay glanced from Axel to each other and back again. How nice of you, Axel, Gail murmured, her eyes brimming with tears. Now that everything was out on the table, Axel pushed onward, trying to lighten his tone. I need a list of attendees from you, Gail. Everything is taken care of. All you have to do is show up and enjoy the experience of being a bride. Gail, I didn't realize this was so important to you. Clay faltered, swallowed, started again. Tell me what you need, Axel. I'll help you pull this off. I didn't want to cause a fuss. Gail placed her palms on her cheeks. I only mentioned it to Axel because she never got those things before. Even though Gail was tap dancing around the facts, Axel didn't plan to. Gail deserves to feel special. She does, Clay agreed, voice thick with emotion. I'm proud of you for taking that on. I'm proud of you in so many ways. I'm sure you've thought out everything you need to about this business idea, son. Son. Axel wasn't Clay's son. He never would be. My name is Axel. You made it very clear that I wasn't your son when you wouldn't challenge Eva Martinez for the right to be my father. Suddenly out of breath, Axel couldn't stay in the house another minute. He bolted for the door, running down the steps the way he had when he was a kid and things didn't go his way. Racing for the sidewalk the way he had the day Clay and Lita broke the news that they wouldn't be adopting him. He'd run into the street and been hit by a car. Luckily, old man Abernathy had been driving at a snail's pace. Still, Axel's leg had been broken and there was no more talk of adoption after that. Penny pulled up to the curb just as Axel reached the sidewalk, windows down and engine running rough again. Sorry, I'm late. You're right on time. Axel climbed into the front seat. Ax! Trey cried from his car seat in the back where he held a Spider-Man action figure. Look! Hey, buddy. I like Spider-Man too. Axel pushed a smile past the guilt he felt over the words he'd thrown at Clay, glancing back toward the house where Clay and Gail stood in the doorway, holding hands. We love you, Alexander. Head muddled with emotion, Axel couldn't tell if that was Lita's voice in his head or Gail's. He turned his back to the door. I could use some really good news right now, Penny, like a property I can afford with 3 service bays and a lift. Something he'd be proud to show Clay or any of the doubters in town. Penny caught Axel's hand and gave it a squeeze. The good news is that Cindy pre-approved you for a loan. I have 3 options to show you today. All in your budget. Axel felt Clay's gaze on his back, resisting the urge to return to the house and apologize. And the bad news? There was always bad news. There is no bad news. And Penny laughed when she said it, as if she believed it. In his heart, Axel wanted to believe it, too. This is Option number BR1. Penny parked in the driveway of Oceanside Beetles, a garage specializing in repairing Volkswagens. Excitement had her hands trembling nearly as much as her shaky words. She didn't want to let Axel down. Harry Parnell wants to retire. He leases this property. He's selling the business and offering for weeks of help transitioning things to the new owner. She retrieved a sheet of paper with the business specifications on it and rattled off how much Harry had made annually in the past 5 years. You'd have to pick up the lease and pay Harry for the business. But your loan will cover that, and it's worth it. Repairing Volkswagens. Axel sounded doubtful and looked forlorn. He'd been in a funk since she'd picked him up. Penny pushed on. His sales seemed to indicate it's a lucrative business. The price includes all his tools and parts inventory, plus some old vans and bugs in the back. Admittedly, the business wasn't as well cared for as Mr. Hammond's. Weeds had claimed the fence border but did nothing to soften the abandoned look of the rusted vehicles on the other side of the chain link. Axel stared at the shop, probably taking note of the office's cracked window and the faded sign. It's only got one service bay and it's Volkswagen's. Find the bright side, Penny. You say Volkswagen as if it's a bad thing. Bug owners are loyal to the brand. You have a built-in clientele. Did you hear the numbers he's making? That's a decent living for a one-man show. Axel crossed his arms over his chest, tucking his hands away. But it's got a ceiling in terms of business size. There's only one service bay. And it's Volkswagen's. Penny's spirits sank. I get it. You're doubtful you can expand beyond his current clientele. Penny hadn't thought of that. She checked her listing sheet. I thought it said something about 2 bays though. And yes. It does say 2. She got out of the car and went to peek in the window. It's a double. One behind the other. 2 bays had to mean something. She hurried back to the car. The bay setup is inconvenient. Axel still sat in his closed position. What if I can't get the car blocking the door to start? The car in back would be trapped. Customers would be angry. I hadn't thought about that. Penny knew she was supposed to be upbeat, learning more about what Axel wanted in a property with every showing, but she was taking his rejection personally. Why don't you think about this one while we head over to the next option? Axel grunted. Axe needs ice cream. Trey grinned at Penny in the rearview mirror. He was becoming better at verbal communication every day, just as Dr. Inman had promised. Ice cream is good. Mommy will need ice cream after this. Penny couldn't keep the sarcasm from her tone. Honestly, Axel. I think you'd jump at the chance if the business was called Oceanside Corvettes. Why, Penny? Axel's arms loosened and he almost smiled. I didn't think you knew me that well. I know you, all right. Heartened, Penny started the car. I know you care too much about what people think nowadays. The Axel I fell in love with, she thought fleetingly, admired would judge people and things by their merits and expect the same of them. That hint of a smile on his face became a real one. If I would have known you spent so much time studying me, Penny, I would have tried stealing a kiss sooner than the graduation dance. The thought thrilled her so much she pressed down too hard on the accelerator as she backed out of the driveway, making one wheel bounce over the curb. Sorry. Trey giggled. I know owning a business is scary. She put the car in drive and headed toward the next property. You can do this. I believe you can do hard things, like turn a lump of coal into a diamond. You're looking to make a sale, he grumped. You betcha. Penny chuckled. And don't forget you owe me a date at the reunion, even if I don't find you a property you like today. I'm still coordinating the bridal shower. Which was turning out to be a lot of fun to plan. Funny you should say that. Axel flashed his phone at her. Gail just sent me a guest list. Thank heavens. Ice cream. Trey kicked his feet against the back of her seat. Mama. Ice cream. Later, Trey, Penny promised. Now. Trey continued to kick. No ice cream if you can't sit still, Trey, Axel said, an oddly stern note to his voice. Trey stilled. Okay. Axel clapped a hand over his eyes. Geez, oh Pete, I sound like clay. I apologize. Axel looked so stricken that Penny laughed. We all turn into our parents eventually. We take on too much responsibility and forget what it was like to be spontaneous or to dream big. Are you dreaming big, Penny? Axel propped his elbow on her center console and put his chin in his hand as he stared at her. She liked it when his attention was turned her way. I haven't been spontaneous or allowed myself to dream big, she admitted. Until now. Until this. She risked a glance at this enigmatic, enticing man. Until you. Now you're going to make me blush. Not likely. His grin was too wicked, and those dark eyes sparkled. It was time to say more about what happened 10 years ago. Penny pulled over. Axel, the night you kissed me was the one real thing in my high school experience. And I walked away from it. From you. Everything would have been different after that if I'd stood up for myself or held on to you. Although holding on to him had seemed cowardly at the time. I despised Brett for throwing that punch, but I went with him anyway because I was scared. I'm sorry about that. I should have stood by you. And been with him, the way she wanted to be now. Giving in to impulse, she brushed the dark hair out of his eyes and pressed a quick kiss to his lips. That was nice, he murmured, staring at her mouth. Penny suppressed a shiver and a smile. The point I'm trying to make is that if you want to be happy, you have to choose a path that makes you happy. And sometimes, just making that choice makes you nervous or scared. You're saying that I need to swallow my fears about change and set my pride aside when it comes to going into business for myself. The warmth in his eyes stole her breath, so it was a good thing he kept on talking. I've never thought bad of you for choosing Brett. And I don't mean to be difficult on this property search, but you're going to be, she finished for him. He nodded. And I may need time to think things through, weigh my options. He ran the back of his hand over her cheek in a touch that was feather-light. My foster family would say I spend too much time alone in my head and not enough time doing things. I hope that's not true. Because she wanted him to take steps toward a bigger future, one that might include her and Trey. You want me to buy this? For 6 figures? Axel stared at what looked like a 2-story box. A 2-story box that looked like a strong wind would blow it over. It looked like many of the apartments he'd shared with his mother. This is what Clay would call a caution. I call it a project. Penny had on her optimistic cap. It's a 2-car garage that is extra deep with a 2-bedroom apartment built over it. That'll save you rent. The neighborhood is zoned multi-use, commercial and residential. 2 houses down is a law firm. Across the street is a doctor's office. The paint is peeling. The garage door needs replacing. Axel glanced around. And there's a yard filled mostly with weeds. Sweat equity will get you far. Penny drew out her spec sheet and read him the particulars, square footage, and property taxes. You'd have to equip the garage with all your own tools and spread the word that you were in business. But it's definitely cheaper than the first place we looked at. She nudged his shoulder. You could service Corvettes here. Axel continued to stare at the ramshackle building. It was a wreck, plain and simple. I'm not sure I have enough imagination to picture how it could be. Let's explore what's inside. Penny turned off the engine. You'll see. He doubted it. Ice cream? Trey asked hopefully. Trey's got the right idea. This wasn't so much a business opportunity as a multi-year project. How am I supposed to fix the building while I'm fixing cars? I'm sure you'll figure that out as you weigh your options. Penny got out and removed Trey from his car seat. Reluctantly, Axel got out, too. He took Trey from her. The little dude nestled into his arms as if it were a safe and familiar resting place. Axel rubbed his back, taking some comfort in Trey's calm as he followed Penny to the main floor door. It can't be as bad as it looks. But it could. The concrete floor was grease-stained and cracked. It would need to be repoured. The walls weren't insulated, unless you counted thick cobwebs. It smells like wood rot. It smells like a bargain. Don't you see? In its current condition, we can talk them down in price. Penny walked toward the rear of the garage. There's an office back here and a stairwell to the apartment. The office was the size of a closet. The stairs, steep and narrow. Upstairs, the kitchen cabinets were from the 1960s with scalloped trim. The wallpaper behind the stove featured copper teapots and orange flowers. The carpet was a dirty green shag. The bedrooms had brown wood paneling. The bathroom was pink and just as dated and worn as the rest of the place. Despite that, Penny was walking around and talking with enthusiasm. What a steal! There was a robbery in the making here, all right. But it wasn't Axel who'd be doing the stealing. This is the kind of place that Clay and Seth expect me to buy. I'm proud of you, son, he recalled. Clay wouldn't be if Axel bought this. Penny frowned. It's a fixer, which will save you thousands of dollars. You don't think your family will respect you for investing wisely? He shook his head. With the proper investment and care, your investment will increase 25% in value in 5 years. During which time, I'll be bankrupt. Penny squared her shoulders. I seem to recall you buying a wreck of a car when we were in high school. It didn't even run when you bought it. Axel nodded. I sold it for a pretty profit. You can do that here. Fix it. Establish a business. Sell and move to a better location. She said all the right things. There's just one problem. He met her gaze, not sure if he wanted to admit what was holding him back. At her nod, he pressed on. If I buy this, no one in town will be surprised. You don't know that. I do, he insisted. I would much rather buy the best. Like Seaglass Bay Automotive. Penny took tray from him. And if you can't afford the best? Maybe I should keep working. He hoped that didn't mean their date was going to be cancelled. But that's a moot point. Didn't you say you had 3 properties to show me? I have 3 options. Penny carried Trey downstairs and out to the car, buckling him into his safety seat before returning to the property to lock up. None of the options is the diamond you're looking for, unless you consider these diamonds in the rough. Surprise me. Axel got into her car, aware of the chill in the air. And it wasn't coming from the sun moving lower on the horizon. Penny was disappointed in him. She drove toward the highway, parking at the curb of Carlson Cars. You want to dip your toe a little bit in the auto repair waters? This is it. She gestured toward the used car lot. Axel's gaze caught on a red Corvette. Where? Penny pointed toward the back of the lot. You see that big van back there? You can equip it with tools and parts, and drive to your customers. It's a food truck. He couldn't take his eyes off the swirl of bright red colors on the vehicle, including a 10-foot hot dog painted on the side. Axel. Penny took his hand and gave it a squeeze. We made a deal. I throw Gail a bridal shower, you'd be my date at the high school reunion, and you'd be my realtor, he said absently, still staring at the van. Penny released his hand and pulled away from the curb. I can't be your realtor, Axel, not until you realize that dreams should be for your own satisfaction, not to impress someone else. Chapter 6. You look gorgeous. Axel handed Penny a blue orchid corsage on Friday night and tugged at his tie. He'd taken off work early to clean up. He'd ironed black slacks and a blue dress shirt. But his preparations were nothing compared to Penny's. She wore a slinky black dress that hit her mid-thigh. Her blonde hair was in a sophisticated twist at the nape of her neck. Sparkly silver heels that made her nearly as tall as he was. And for one brief second, she smiled at him as if his reaction to her appearance was just what she'd been hoping for. Axel wanted to kiss her, but since she'd shown him property 2 days ago, she'd limited their interactions to brief text messages asking him to approve details for Gail's bridal shower, which was going to be held at the tipsy table on Saturday afternoon. She wasn't the only one avoiding someone. Axel was avoiding Clay's requests to come over and talk. You clean up nice. Penny invited him inside her apartment, removed the wrist corsage from its package and slipped it on. Who am I kidding? You look so handsome that someone's going to steal you away tonight. She laughed, but it was a hollow sound. Axel wanted her optimism, her joy, or the intense look he saw in her eyes before she kissed him. But he disappointed her on the property search. She couldn't understand his need to be bulletproof in the community or with family, and he couldn't give up the desire for the one business he truly wanted. No one's going to take me from your side, Axel said with conviction, tugging at his tie. He reached for Penny's hand, twining their fingers together. This is our do-over, remember? 10 years in the making. Where's Trey? With my parents. She didn't look at him as she unbound their fingers. We should get going. Wouldn't want to miss dinner. Axel wanted exactly that, but he escorted her to his truck anyway. The drive to the high school gymnasium was quiet. A line had formed at the gym, a line with fancy-dressed couples, including Jared and his date, Nina. Axel parked and hurried around to open Penny's door. He was late. She got out on her own. Apparently, the new Penny, the one he'd inspired to take charge of her life, didn't have room for an overly cautious, former foster kid who was afraid no one would like Alexander Martinez. I'm proud of you, son. He thought again. Axel needed to act like he deserved Clay's praise. He'd visit him tomorrow during the shower and apologize. He'd thank Clay for his support, patience, and kindness toward a messed-up kid, a boy who'd bluffed his way through life pretending to be tough. Penny flashed him a cautious smile. Penny likes the real me. The man in the grease-stained coveralls who enjoyed putting his toes in the sand during his lunch hour. She'd kissed him at his picnic bench. Didn't that mean she could love him even if he didn't run the largest repair garage in Seaglass Bay? He wanted that desperately because... I love Penny. Axel drew a deep, slow breath. He loved the way she empathized with his childhood. He loved the way she saw through his bluntness to his vulnerabilities. He loved that she tried to steer him toward success but could admit her own limits in helping him. I can't be your realtor, Axel, not until you realize that dreams should be for your own satisfaction. Penny. He caught her hand once more, anxious because love had T-boned him, and he had no time to settle on words that could convey what he felt in a way that didn't sound desperate or vulnerable. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't like anything you showed me. That doesn't mean you can't show me other prospects. That doesn't mean we can't see each other while I wait for the right place to come on the market. In between looking, we could take Trey to the beach or go for ice cream, maybe have a nice dinner, just the two of us. Thank you, but, she lifted her palm to his cheek. We tried looking and you rejected properties because you're not ready to make your dream a reality. I have to think of my future, Axel. Mine and Trey's. When I fall in love again, it has to be with someone who's moving his life forward, not someone who, her hand fell away. Not someone who's scared of change, he finished for her, caught between the scars of the past and defense against scars in the future. But he loved her. He loved her and he had to explain. I want to be that person, Penny. I wish I could have been that person the night I kissed you all those years ago. But I was afraid that if I made waves in town by punching Brett that Clay and Lita would give up on me. And I was afraid of doing something for myself. Admittedly, it takes me time to get used to the idea of something new, Axel allowed. But I'm ready to embrace the idea of starting out small. At least, when it comes to opening an auto repair shop. As for other new things, I'm ready to embrace a different kind of life, with you and Trey. Oh, Axel. Even taking small steps of change is a big step in itself. Penny wrapped her arms around his neck. I want that, too. I'm sorry if I've been pushing too much. I promise to go slow. Harsh laughter filled the air. All is right with the world, Jules. Brett strutted forward with Julie Haney on his arm. Brett wasn't just wearing a tie. He was wearing an expensive-looking black suit. Even his shiny black shoes looked like he'd spent a fortune on them. Brett was everything Axel wasn't, had everything Axel didn't. Except for Penny. I'm here with you, Jules, and Penny's with her class of guy. Low class, that is. Brett chuckled, coming to a halt in front of Penny and Axel, managing to smile down on the pair even though he wasn't as tall as Axel. Instinctively, Axel tucked her behind him. That seemed to goad Brett into attack mode. I should have picked better bloodlines to breed with. But this is too low, Penny. I don't approve of my son hanging out with garbage. At this rate, that kid will never talk. Penny gasped. Axel forced himself to laugh. Listen to yourself, Brett. Talking about your son without love or pride. He glanced over his shoulder at Penny, noting the hurt in her blue eyes and wanting to protect her from ever being hurt again. Let's head inside, Penny. There's too much stink in the air out here. He guided her toward the gymnasium sidewalk where he saw Jared and Nina had stepped out of line to move toward them. Hey! Brett grabbed Axel's arm. Nobody talks to me like that. Somebody should. Axel jerked free. You're a bully and a cheat. You always have been. You paid Kevin Evans to do your homework in high school. You claimed Jared only got the starting spot on the football team ahead of you because of a mysterious trick knee. You sell used cars that break down the moment they leave the lot. You were two-timing your wife with Julie. And I wouldn't be surprised if you were still cheating at something. Normally, Axel would have stopped there. But Brett's attack on Penny was too much. You know, I saw your Mercedes parked out at Pinnacle Point the other night. Odd place for a married man to be, don't you? With a feral sound, Brett swung a fist toward Axel's face. Axel blocked the blow with his forearm and countered with an uppercut that connected with his rival's chin. Brett crumpled like a blade of fresh-cut grass in a gust of unexpected wind. A cheer rose from those waiting to enter the gymnasium, which, when combined with Brett's collapse, would have been immensely satisfying if Penny hadn't rushed forward with Julie to attend to the jerk. He's breathing, Penny said. Jared appeared at Axel's side. Come on, man. Give Brett some breathing room. Why? I'm not going to hit him again. There was no need. Brett was passed out. Axel should have been crowing with satisfaction. Instead, he was staring at Penny getting to her feet. I didn't mean to hit him so hard. Before she could reply, Jared dragged Axel to the far side of the parking lot. Do you know what Brett's going to do the moment he comes to? He's going to call the sheriff. We need to call Seth first. Brett Carlson wants to press charges. An hour later, Seth sat in a chair across from Axel in the sheriff office's conference room. Clay sat next to Seth. Jared sat next to Axel. Not that it mattered. There weren't two sides here. All the Hollister men were frowning at Axel. At the risk of repeating myself, Axel said flatly. Brett took the first swing. Which I saw, Jared added, although that didn't stop him from frowning. Violence never solved anything. But Clay's opinion lacked its usual finality. But in this case, it made me feel better. Axel thrust his chin in the air. That blow was 10 years coming. And before you start in on the lecture, Seth, I plan to apologize to the jerk. If for no other reason than because Penny might forgive him if he did. And while I'm on the apology train, I want to say I'm sorry for the other night. Axel met Clay's gaze. Seth pinched the bridge of his nose. Axel, what have you done now? Nothing. Clay pointed at Axel with one finger. He just needs to hear that I'm his father and you're his brothers, no matter what the courts say. I don't need a paper signed by a judge to claim you as my son, Axel. Axel's mouth dropped open. Seth lowered the hand from in front of his face. But Clay wasn't finished. It was obvious to us that you wanted our relationship to be legal. Heck, you ran out the door when we tried to have this conversation the first time and broke your leg. Mom made us swear not to bring up the topic of adoption again, Jared added, loosening his red suit tie. She was afraid you'd do more than run out in the street. She was afraid you'd run away. Clay nodded. We tried convincing Ava a second time, but she was convinced that once she found a good place to live and a decent job, that you'd be better off with her. He cleared his throat. I don't think she ever got her life together to a point she felt comfortable coming back for you. And that's a shame, because you've grown into a man she'd have been proud of. The table fell silent. You're a Hollister, Axel, Seth said, voice just as thick with emotion as Clay's had been. We all believe it. Through thick and thin, Jared chimed in. We love you. Clay put just the right accent on the conversation. Maybe I shouldn't have belted Brett and caused all this trouble, Axel admitted slowly, although then he might never have learned how they felt about him. What trouble? Jared clapped a hand on Axel's shoulder. We got out of dancing. Ha! Jared hates to dance. Seth reached across the table and poked Jared's shoulder. And then he sobered. Why are you acting like you've murdered someone? I brought you down here to make a statement, not arrest you. Everyone saw Brett take the first swing. And everyone thought he got what he deserved. Jared stared at Seth as if thinking about what he deserved for poking his shoulder. If anyone says he touched me first, I'm going to stop the proverbial car the same way our parents did when we were kids. Clay shook his finger at each of them in turn. It was like they were all kids again and on a road trip. They grinned at each other. You're not in trouble, son, Clay said, holding Axel's gaze. We're all here to support you, not berate you. I haven't always been here for you lately. Jared picked up where their father had left off. But what Dad says is right. We're family. I wouldn't tease you so much if you weren't my little brother, Seth said with a wry smile. I didn't realize this has been an issue with you. We should have come clean about this years ago, I guess. Among other things. Clay, Dad, began to smile. Apparently, Axel is the only one of you brave enough to tell me I'm too bossy, that I need to pay attention more to others' needs. Yours. My future wife's. Things in this family are going to change. Family. Misty-eyed, Axel got to his feet and hugged the only man who'd ever cared enough to be his father. And then Jared wrapped his arms around them just moments before Seth did the same. Family. Axel hadn't thought he fully belonged to them or to Seaglass Bay, not until that moment. He hadn't thought they'd loved him for who he was, not until that moment. The conference room door swung open. I don't know what's going on here, but I want in. That was Gail. She inched her way into the family embrace, whispering, someone should have called me sooner. I should have been here for my boy at the first sign of trouble rather than hearing about it through the grapevine. Son. My little brother. My boy. Family. I guess I'll have to start calling you two Mom and Dad. That's music to my ears, Clay said gruffly. Axel was caught in the tangle of arms and in a circle of love. But he wouldn't have it any other way with the Hollisters. Now he had to make it right with Penny. Chapter 7. Penny stared at Axel's text message one more time. Meet me at the two-story box after work. Because exercise was on her list of things to get reacquainted with, she'd put Trey in his stroller after she left Bell Realty and pushed him toward the property listing. She waited at an intersection to cross the street, staring at her phone. Why did Axel want to meet at a property he'd rejected? It had been 2 days since Axel had punched Brett's lights out. She'd been afraid Axel had hit him so hard that Brett's nose had been broken, that he'd killed him. Thank heavens, he hadn't. But they hadn't talked since then. Axel had been whisked away by Sheriff Hollister and Brett had been taken to the hospital for concussion watch. Penny tried not to take any pleasure in Brett's comeuppance. But wow, those assembled sure had. She sighed and crossed the street. Axel probably blamed her for the ensuing trouble because that seemed the only reason he hadn't called her since. Ahead, Axel pulled into the driveway of the listing. Tall, thick cypress hedges hid him from sight. Axe. Trey reached his hands forward. I want Axe. Me, too, honey. Penny pushed the stroller at a faster clip until she reached the listing's driveway and came to an abrupt halt. "What are you doing?" Axel was taping a big paper sign on the paint-flaking garage door with duct tape. "I'm staking a claim." He turned and strode toward her, allowing her to read his work. "Future home of Axel's Auto Repair." That had a nice ring to it, except. "You didn't make an offer through another realtor, did you?" "No," he wrapped his arms around her and swung her through the air. "You're my real estate agent. I'm just making sure that the Penny I want to marry knows that I was serious the other day about taking steps to move forward." He set her down. Penny was suddenly shy. "You don't blame me?" "Not one bit." Axe. Pick me." Trey twisted in his stroller, reaching for the man who'd stolen both their hearts. "I pick you both, buddy." Axel released Penny, who landed on 2 feet, breathless. He turned to take Trey from the stroller. "I may still make mistakes, but I'll always choose the two of you." He settled Trey on his hip and faced Penny. "Right before I punched Brett, which was the wrong thing to do, I was thinking how much I loved you, Penny. I know I'll never quite shake the past and that feeling that I'm being judged, even when I shouldn't care. But I'm willing to step out of my comfort zone into something that isn't the exact replica of my dream." "Back up a second." Penny found her footing. "You love me?" The question came out on a squeaky whisper. "You and the nugget." Axel nodded. "I know you might not forgive me for decking Brett the other day, but that's the last time I step out of line." His smile wavered. "I mean, I'll try not to step out of line anymore. Because I love you, Penny. I love your optimism and your methodical way of approaching life. I love that you think about what you, me, and Trey need. I love that you think things through while I might overthink everything." "Stop talking," she commanded. "Oh." Axel looked crestfallen. "Stop talking so I can tell you I love you too." She threw her arms around the two loves of her life. "I love you. I think I always have. And I want to make things better for you, now and always." "I never knew family hugs were so wonderful," Axel murmured in her ear. She drew back enough to glance up at him. "What does that mean?" "File that under conversations for later." He kissed her. Briefly, because Trey was chanting, "Axe, axe, axe." He set her son down and turned to face the 2-story property. "This is just the first step in our future." Then he stared down at her with so much warmth in those dark eyes of his that she wanted to cry. Instead, she took his hand and Trey's. "Our future." I like the sound of that. She wasn't letting go of Axel again. "Mr. and Mrs. Alexander Martinez. And son."
"Yeah."
About that, Axel made the "I love you" gesture in sign language. First to Trey and then to Penny, which melted her heart. "Clay and Gail are making it official." "Getting married?" Penny had no idea why Axel was telling her what she already knew. "Yes, but that's not what I meant." His smile was as broad as the ocean's horizon. "They're adopting me." He bussed her lips with an enthusiastic kiss. "I'm going to be a Hollister. I'm finally going to belong." He kissed her thoroughly. And while their lips got reacquainted, Trey marched around them shouting, "I love Mommy. I love Axe. I love Maple. I love ice cream." Their kiss dissolved into chuckles. His arms loosened enough that she could gaze up into his deep, dark eyes while Trey continued to march and chant. "You've always belonged, Axel. To the Hollisters. And in some way, to her. And whether I'm called Mrs. Hollister or Mrs. Martinez, my last name doesn't matter as long as you love me." "I do, baby. Now and forever."